Hi, my name is Opal, and I used to think the worst thing my family ever did was ignore me. But that was before the group chat, before the silence that followed my no, before the coffee my mother made me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They said I was unstable, that I was imagining things. But what if your own blood tried to erase you? Because you inherited what they felt entitled to. What if your sister, your mother, even your father, believed the truth was something they could rewrite? I said no to $120,000. And in return, they tried to take everything. Why would a family do that? To their own daughter. I was sitting in the back corner of the small bookshop cafe downtown, nursing a lukewarm cappuccino, when my phone buzzed. I ignored it for a second, watching a college kid clumsily stuff books into his backpack like he was packing for a 5-minute getaway. Another buzz, then a third. When I finally looked, it was the family group chat. That cursed little bubble where birthdays are forgotten, but passive aggression thrives. The message was from my mother, and it read exactly as I feared. Can you send $120K for Isolda's startup? It would mean a lot. That was it. No hi, sweetheart. No hope you're well. Not even a congrats for the massive shift in my life that had happened just days ago. I stared at the screen. Seen by Mom, Dad, Isolda. No one said a word, not even a heart reaction, just silence. I typed out a single word. No. Sent it. Then turned my phone upside down like that might shut out the invisible weight pressing against my chest. A week ago, I'd been called into a beige office that smelled faintly of old books and pipe smoke. My grandfather's lawyer, an older man with the kind of patience that only came from watching families disintegrate over paperwork, read me the will. I had inherited everything. $80 million in oil and mineral rights, land, and family property. The estate that built our name in this town now belonged to me, the daughter who never quite fit the mold. He'd bypassed my parents, bypassed Isolda. The room felt colder after he said it. I sat there trying not to tremble while he explained that my grandfather left a personal letter in the back of the will. It wasn't long, just a paragraph. You were the only one who never asked for anything. I didn't feel proud. I felt scared, because I knew what this meant. The next morning, my phone rang. Just dinner, my mother said with a syrupy tone she saved for outsiders and awkward family moments. Nothing serious. Isolda wants to catch up. Wants to catch up? My sister hadn't called me in 2 years unless it was to borrow something. Still, I said yes. Part curiosity, part familial guilt. Part of me wanted to believe they were capable of love not tied to expectation. That night, I drove up to my parents' house just before 6. The backyard was staged like it came out of a lifestyle magazine, twinkling string lights, wine glasses perfectly spaced, a curated playlist humming in the background. My mother greeted me at the door like a southern hostess from a 1950s drama. "Darling," she sang, "so glad you made it." I barely set my purse down before she whisked me outside. And there she was, Isolda, polished, radiant, speaking with her hands like she was mid-TED Talk. "This is Lucan," she beamed, turning to a man I hadn't seen in almost a decade. My stomach dropped. Lucan Dovey, my ex. The one who vanished after I refused to co-sign a business loan years ago. "Business partner," she added with a wink, as if to cover the awkwardness with sparkle. I was seated at the far end of the table, near the rusting side panel of the old outdoor heater. The only view I had was of the ivy crawling up the fence. The meal started with salad and moved quickly into a pitch. Isolda launched into her vision for Life Cure, a wellness tech company designed to change the way we connect with healing. My mother nodded along like it was scripture. My father stayed quiet, sipping wine. Lucan watched me the entire time, his expression unreadable. Then came the ask, as casual as a weather update. "Of course, with just a bit of backing," Isolda said, her voice softening. "We could get it off the ground. $120,000 would get us through phase 1. Before I could react, my mother chimed in. "You know your grandfather would have wanted you to help family, Opal." My grip tightened on the stem of my glass. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Isolda leaned forward, clasping her hands like a politician at a fundraiser. "I mean, Who better than you to steward the next generation of legacy? Legacy. That word always sounded like ownership disguised as reverence. I waited until the conversation dipped into an awkward silence, then said simply, no. No flourish. No explanation. You could have heard a napkin hit the grass. My mother's smile twitched, held its place like a crack in porcelain. Isolde's jaw shifted just enough to register. Lucan looked away, busying himself with his wine. No one said another word, not for the rest of the meal. Dessert came and went, no mention of family, no laughter, no warmth. I drove home in silence, the music off. Every red light felt like an interrogation. What had just happened? Was it over now, or had I just lit a fuse? At a stop sign, my phone buzzed again. A new message, just from Mom. Come by tomorrow. I've made that Ethiopian coffee you love, just you and me. It took me a full minute to process that text. I barely slept that night. My mind was too loud, replaying every look from dinner, every pointed silence. The words, just you and me, haunted me. So soft, so warm, and yet they felt like ice. I knew my mother well enough to recognize a setup when I saw one. But curiosity, or something deeper I still couldn't name, pushed me to show up anyway. I arrived at their house around 10 the next morning. The air carried that November crispness, sharp and clean. My shoes crunched over the gravel as I walked up to the front porch. The house looked the same, of course, it always did. Frozen in time like nothing ever truly changed here, just rearranged slightly to feel new. But the energy was off. The door opened before I could knock. Opal, sweet girl, my mother said with that sing-song cadence she reserved for guests and guilt trips. She wore a lavender apron, her lipstick a touch too red for morning. Come in, come in. I just started brewing it. The smell hit me the second I stepped inside. Warm, nutty, vaguely floral. Ethiopian roast, my favorite since college. Except, there was something else in the air, something faintly bitter clinging behind the vanilla undertones. A scent that didn't belong. She ushered me into the kitchen, where 2 white porcelain mugs sat on the counter, steam curling in quiet spirals above them. No sugar, no cream. Just black, exactly how I used to drink it back when she still remembered more about me than my bank balance. I thought we could talk, she said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder before retreating to her side of the counter. It's been too tense lately. I want us back on good footing, like we used to be. I sat, not responding right away. My eyes moved from her face to the coffee. You made this yourself? She nodded. Of course, just like old times. Which one's mine? I asked, keeping my tone flat. That one. She pointed to the cup on the left, closest to me. I picked it up, brought it to my nose. There it was again, beneath the roast, the sweetness, a sharpness, like almonds. I hesitated, letting the cup hover just beneath my chin. Did you try yours yet? I asked, not lifting my eyes. There was the smallest flicker in her expression. It lasted less than a breath. You go first, sweetheart. In that split second, I knew. She had no intention of drinking hers. I smiled thinly. All right. And just as she turned to reach for the sugar jar behind her, I swapped our mugs. Quick, clean, unnoticed. I took a small sip of the one she'd pointed to as hers, barely letting the liquid touch my tongue. Then I set it down. She turned back, picked up her cup, the one she had intended for me, and sipped. Her face didn't change at first. She even smiled. So, have you reconsidered helping your sister? She asked casually, as if we hadn't both danced around a ritual as old as betrayal. I stared at her, unblinking. No, I haven't. Within minutes, her smile began to falter. She shifted in her seat, her fingers curled tightly around the mug, her breathing changed, shorter, faster. I need water, she croaked. You all right? I asked, not moving. She coughed. Her eyes watered, her voice cracked. Opal, I can't. My father's footsteps came pounding down the hallway. Vera, he called. When he saw her hunched over, gasping, he shouted, Call 911! I reached into my purse calmly, pulled out my phone, and dialed. "Yes, I need an ambulance," I said, voice steady. "My mother is experiencing what appears to be an allergic reaction. She's having trouble breathing." I gave the address, then hung up. She was on the floor now, wheezing. Calvin was on his knees beside her, panic in his eyes. "What happened?" "She drank the coffee," I said. "She said she made it herself." The paramedics arrived within minutes. I stood in the corner as they stabilized her, inserted a line, loaded her onto the stretcher. No one asked me to explain. No one looked at me. At the hospital, things got worse. "She did this," my mother rasped, her voice hoarse but focused like a laser on me. "The coffee. She poisoned it. It was meant for her, and she tried to switch it." My father backed her up without blinking. "She's been unstable for a while now. Ever since the will was read. She thinks we're all out to get her." I didn't react. Didn't flinch. I sat in the sterile white room, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the lies stack like bricks. They weren't just trying to discredit me, they were trying to erase me. A nurse entered. "Can I ask a few questions?" she said gently. "Have you ever been diagnosed with anxiety or any other mental health condition?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Just part of the process," she replied, too quickly. "Given the family's concern," I exhaled slowly. "You should test the coffee, both cups. Get the forensics team to run the analysis." She didn't write that down, and no one looked me in the eyes. I didn't sleep, not because I wasn't tired, my body begged for rest, but because my mind wouldn't quit replaying every glance, every word, every way they tried to convince the hospital staff that I wasn't in control of my own life, that I was dangerous, that I was unstable. The house was dark when I got home. I didn't bother turning on many lights, just enough to find my way to the kitchen. I poured a cup of chamomile tea and carried it to the living room. It sat untouched on the table while I curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I didn't remember grabbing. I stared at the family photo hanging across the room, taken maybe 15 years ago, on one of those forced family photo day afternoons where smiles were plastered over tired resentments. My mother's hand was on Isolde's shoulder, her body slightly turned toward her. My father, standing behind them, had his arms crossed. I was in the corner, barely touching anyone. The image blurred as tears welled. I blinked them back. I didn't want to cry. Not for them. Instead, I reached for the worn envelope tucked inside the drawer of the end table, the letter my grandfather left me. I'd read it at least a dozen times already. But tonight, I needed it again. One line stood out. "Don't let them retell your story, Opal." That was his gift. Not just the estate or the money. He gave me the truth, the courage to stop playing the part they'd written for me. I set the letter down and walked to the hallway closet. I pulled out the old photo album, the one my mom always hid when guests came over. Buried between pages of birthday parties and vacation pictures was a small printout of a local gallery flyer, featuring Opal Greer, Emerging Artist Series. I was 24. My grandfather had attended, proud as anything. That night, after the event, my father had pulled me aside in the parking lot. "You know he only supports you because he feels guilty, right? For not being there more when you were a kid. You just got lucky." That wasn't the first time. I remembered getting a scholarship in high school. "It's because of your last name," he'd said. When I landed my first real job out of college, they needed to meet some diversity quota. When I bought my first home, the market just happened to dip. Right place, right time. Each time, the same message. "You didn't earn this. You just happened to be there." He never yelled, never raised a hand. His words didn't leave bruises. They left erosion. Back on the couch, I stared at the tea again, still untouched. I couldn't bring myself to drink it. Not after the coffee incident. Even when it was my own kitchen, my own cup, the fear had settled too deep. I opened my laptop instead and logged into my bank portal. The numbers blinked at me, reminding me of what they all wanted, what they believed they were owed. I cross-referenced every transaction over the last month. There it was, a strange login 2 days before my grandfather passed. The IP address was from Austin, not Fredericksburg. It wasn't mine. I took a notebook from the side table and began listing every name I could think of who had access to my grandfather's documents. His nurse, the estate attorney, the housekeeper, and Isolde. Of course, she had stayed with him the week before he passed. She said it was to give Mom a break. I underlined her name twice. Then I opened my email. There was a flagged message from the lawyer's office, dated the day after the will was read. Subject: Follow-up. Estate file access confirmation. I clicked it open. Inside was a single line. Per your request, access credentials were updated. My heart thumped. I never made that request. I stared at the screen for a long time, willing it to explain itself. The reality was crawling in now. Someone had impersonated me. Someone who knew enough to answer the security questions, to mimic my tone, to plan ahead. I glanced up at the security monitor I'd installed a year ago, mostly for peace of mind. I clicked through the playback from earlier that evening. Around 8:47 p.m., a figure appeared on the edge of the camera's range, hooded, tall, moving with eerie familiarity. They didn't knock. They didn't approach the door. They simply lingered, watching, then vanished. I paused the video, zoomed in, but the resolution wasn't good enough to identify anything. Still, the outline was familiar. Something in the way the body shifted weight, slightly leaning right. Isolde had a bad knee from a ski trip in her 20s. That lean had been noticeable ever since. I set the laptop down and stood. My legs were stiff. My shoulders ached, but I didn't feel tired. I felt done. I whispered it into the empty room, my voice barely audible. I've been quiet too long. I walked into the kitchen and started writing on the whiteboard I kept for grocery lists. But tonight, I wasn't writing eggs or milk. I was making a plan. They wanted a story where I was the crazy one. The ungrateful daughter, the paranoid sister, but I wasn't going to let them be the authors anymore. I was going to flip the script. The chill from that moment stayed with me long after the figure disappeared. Even as I double-checked all the locks and reset the motion lights, my stomach twisted with something more potent than fear. It was confirmation. Whatever I'd suspected, it was now personal, deliberate, and escalating. 2 mornings later, the skies had turned a dull slate gray, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised a slow, miserable drizzle by afternoon. I sat at my dining table with a cup of coffee I brewed myself. This time, I watched the whole process. My laptop was open in front of me, inheritance portal loaded. I moved the mouse and clicked to log in. Wrong password. I tried again, slower, carefully checking each keystroke. Still wrong. I clicked the forgot password link, entered my email. No recovery email came. Frowning, I picked up my phone and called my attorney's office. Paige, the paralegal, answered after 2 rings. Hi, Paige. Quick question. Did I request a login change for my estate account recently? There was a pause on the other end, then the subtle sound of her typing. Yes. That was updated 2 nights ago. From your usual IP address, actually. My fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't request it. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh. I see. Would you like us to initiate an investigation with the digital forensics team? Yes, I said without hesitation. Please do that now. As soon as I hung up, I turned to the security monitor feed again. I rewound to the time of the IP change. No one had entered, no tripped alarms, nothing but the same silent footage of my front door, back patio, and side yard. That meant someone had accessed my credentials remotely. I opened my email, scrolled through the sent folder. A forwarded message caught my eye. From my mother's email. She had forwarded my legal welcome package to an unknown address just 2 days before the will was read. I stared at the screen. Coldness spread across my shoulders. There was no longer a question about whether this was premeditated. Later that afternoon, under the cover of a polite gesture, I packed up some homemade soup, store-bought but transferred into my own glass container for authenticity, and drove to my parents' house. The sky had darkened further. The front porch light was already on, even though it wasn't quite 4. I rang the bell. The door opened to reveal my father, who grunted a greeting and turned away without another word. I stepped inside. Vera appeared from the living room, wearing a navy cardigan and her concerned but pleasant expression. "Opal, how thoughtful," she said, eyes flicking to the container in my hands. "Come in. Ellie's just drawing in the sunroom." "Hi, Aunt Opal," my niece called out before I even rounded the corner. I walked toward her voice, setting the container down on the kitchen counter along the way. Ellie sat cross-legged on the wide windowsill, a sketch pad balanced on her knees. She looked up with that open, guileless face children still had at 9. "Are you mad at Mom?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "She said if you didn't give the money, she'd have to take it." My heart dropped. "Take it how?" Another shrug. "Like with your passwords, but don't tell. I'm not supposed to know." I blinked, trying to keep my face still. Ellie turned back to her drawing, as if she'd just commented on the weather. Footsteps clicked behind me. "Vera, you're not here to visit, are you?" she said. Her voice was light, but her gaze was steel. I didn't turn around. "You broke into my life." She stepped closer. "You made it too easy, darling." I turned then, looked her square in the face. "You sent the documents from my email. You impersonated me. You stole from me." She let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Is that how you're framing it?" "Ellie knows. You shouldn't use a child as cover." "She doesn't understand what she's saying," Vera said flatly. "She understands enough to repeat what she hears," I replied. "And what she hears is her mother and grandmother conspiring to take what doesn't belong to them." Vera folded her arms. "You sound paranoid." "You've always had a vivid imagination." I walked to the door, grabbing my keys from the side table. My voice was calm, but it felt like iron. "I already contacted the attorney. They're running digital forensics. If I'm right, and we both know I am, you're going to be lucky if this ends with just a civil suit." "Opal, be reasonable. You had your chance to be reasonable. Instead, you went through the back door. Again." I left before she could answer. The door clicked behind me like punctuation. Once I was back in the car, hands trembling slightly, I called Noelle. "I need you to draft a cease and desist," I said, before she could even say hello. "And I want you to start pulling IP logs from every device that's touched my account in the last 30 days. Her voice was calm, steady. "You sure you're ready to go this far?" I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "I was born in that house," I said. "But I'm not dying in it." The next morning, the rain had already started. Thin at first, just mist curling off the driveway, but building steadily as I poured a fresh cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen counter with my laptop. My to-do list was short but sharp: gather evidence, tighten legal strategy, and stop doubting myself. I was done playing defense. I pulled up the Smart Home Hub on my computer. The system automatically archived audio from any voice-activated commands or activity, including those accidental recordings triggered by key phrases. I hadn't checked the folder in weeks, but something nudged me to look. At first, it was all background noise, me asking Alexa to turn on the lights, an episode of a podcast I'd forgotten playing in the background. Then one file stood out. It was only 59 seconds long, time-stamped during one of the days Isolde had been over just to check on me. The name was just a number, randomly assigned by the system. I clicked play. Static. Then, clear as glass, my mother's voice. "If she won't hand it over, Isolde, you do what needs to be done. You're the one people believe." No hesitation, no doubt. Then Isolde. "She's always been dramatic. If she spirals, that's on her. The more fragile she looks, the easier it'll be to shift things legally. Let her drown in her own noise." I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until the clip ended. I played it again and again. Each time, the words cut deeper, like they'd been planning to gut me with a smile on their faces, and I, fool that I was, had spent most of my life hoping they'd just understand me. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands calm even though my chest burned. Then I reached for my phone and dialed Noelle. She picked up on the second ring. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low but alert. "I have something," I said. Not a suspicion. Proof. Recorded audio. Clear voices. Clear intent. Bring it in, she replied. Today. By the time I arrived at her office, the rain had picked up. Water streaked down the tall windows, casting gray veins of light across the walls. Noelle's paralegal greeted me with a nod, eyes flicking to the USB drive in my hand like it was a bomb. I sat across from Noelle, handed it over, and watched her listen through noise-canceling headphones. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tensed. When she finally took them off, she didn't speak right away. "This isn't just sabotage," she said. "This is coordinated character assassination. And that tone from your mother? She sounds like she's rehearsed this." I nodded. "She's been practicing that tone for years." "You understand what this does, right?" Noelle continued. "This won't just expose them. It'll implode everything around them. Your sister's company, your father's legacy, whatever community standing your mother thinks she still has." "Good," I said, meeting her eyes. "Let the fallout show who stood where." We sat in silence for a beat. "Have you considered going public?" she asked. "Not social media. Something cleaner, controlled, press conference maybe?" "They want to win in the court of public opinion. Maybe I should beat them to it," I said. "But not by playing victim, by stating facts, calmly, letting people hear the truth in their own voices. You're talking about a family legacy event." "Exactly," I said. "They were going to use me as the bad daughter. Let's turn the stage around." That night, I sent the clip anonymously to my father's work email. The subject line was short. "In case you still think I'm unstable." I didn't expect a reply, but 30 minutes later, one came. One word. Understood. No apology. No attempt to explain. Just a sudden shift, like the ground beneath his moral compass had collapsed. At 10:14 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Isolde. You've made this ugly. Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. What was there to say? They'd started this war when they decided inheritance was a reward, and I was just a roadblock. The next morning, I met Noelle again to finalize paperwork, cease and desist orders, asset freeze requests, evidence disclosures. It felt mechanical, almost boring compared to the emotional storm inside me. That was a good thing. Emotion had been their weapon. I'd stick to strategy. As we walked out of her office and into the drizzle, Noelle paused. "You ready for this next step?" I nodded. "Let's call it what it is, a legacy reveal." "Mic check?" I smiled. "Mic's hot." Later that evening, I sat in my office with a blank page open on my laptop. Rain tapped softly against the window beside me. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus from the diffuser I'd forgotten to turn off. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I began to type. "My name is Opal Greer, and this is not a sob story. It's a true one." I wrote, deleted, rewrote. After an hour, I had the first half of the opening speech. It was quiet, unapologetic, firm. When I finally stopped, I leaned back and read it aloud to myself, letting each word settle into the air like a stone dropped into a lake. My hand trembled for a moment. But not from fear. I whispered into the stillness, "Let's make them hear everything." I didn't sleep the night before the storm. Instead, I spent hours pacing between the living room and the guest bedroom I'd converted into a workspace months ago. The rain hadn't stopped since evening. Its steady tap against the windows felt less like weather and more like a warning, the kind you ignore until it swallows everything. By morning, the drizzle had turned into a steady downpour. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, this time brewed by my own hand, and carried it to the dining table with my phone. As I scrolled through my notifications, the screen filled with dozens of missed calls, texts, and a barrage of notifications from social platforms I hadn't even opened yet. And then I saw it. A post, viral within hours, shared from a fake community concern page. The headline read, "Heiress abandons ailing mother for millions. Local family cries for justice." Beneath it was a photo of me, grainy but recognizable, walking into Noelle's office 2 days ago. The caption, "Opal Greer, seen here ignoring calls from her dying mother while lawyer shopping to protect her fortune." There were more photos. Me leaving the building, me crossing the parking lot, Me sitting in my car with my hand on my forehead, which, if you twisted the angle just right, looked like guilt. I didn't feel shocked. I felt insulted. This wasn't a strategic move. It was desperation dressed in cheap lipstick. My phone rang. Noelle. They went nuclear, she said. Yeah, I murmured. I just saw. Don't engage directly. We'll respond legally. I'm not responding, I said, already opening my screen recorder. I'm documenting. I clicked through the post. Comment after comment piled on, some fake, some frighteningly real. She's always been odd, even in school. Her grandfather gave her that money out of pity. She wouldn't even be where she is without her mom. Now she's letting her rot alone. Then a comment caught my eye. My niece overheard her cousin talking about passwords and getting in before Auntie Opal could... shady stuff. It was from an anonymous burner account, but something in the phrasing stuck with me. Too specific, too casual. I opened another tab and began searching. Within minutes, I tracked similar phrasing used on a local church bulletin board. Same account style, same rhythm. It matched someone in Vera's women's group. Not long after, another comment appeared. Heard that same kid saying stuff at school, something about Mom said if Auntie didn't share, we'd make her. It was both heartbreaking and pathetic. They were using Ellie, a child, a little girl who just wanted to color and be loved, dragged into an adult war she never signed up for. By noon, I had screenshots, full post captures, account metadata backed up, but I needed one more thing, so I drove. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I pulled into my parents' driveway. The same decorative wreath from 2 seasons ago still hung crooked on the door. I didn't ring the bell this time. I walked in. They hadn't changed the locks. Vera was in the kitchen, drying a glass with too much energy. Isolde stood by the island, arms folded. Don't worry, I brought soup again, I said, voice even. They didn't respond. I turned to Isolde. You're using a child as a weapon. That's a stretch, Opal, she replied. Kids say stuff. Right, I nodded. Except when they say the same thing in school, and on community pages, and in comments that were clearly fed to them. She didn't blink. You've always been the emotional one. This isn't a crime. It's a conversation. Then let's have one, I said, and turned toward the hallway. Ellie, I called softly. She emerged from the den, holding her drawing pad. Sweetheart, I said, crouching to meet her eyes. Do you remember what you told me the other day? She glanced toward her mother. I waited. She looked back at me and whispered, I didn't mean to tell. I'm sorry, Auntie. Silence fell like a sheet of glass shattering. Vera didn't move. Isolde opened her mouth, then closed it. I stood slowly and turned to face them. You dragged a 9-year-old into this. You put her in the line of fire so you could paint yourselves as victims. We were protecting our legacy, Vera said stiffly. No, I said, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a small flash drive and set it on the counter. This is every legal violation you've committed in the past 2 weeks. Digital theft, impersonation, slander, and abuse of minor trust. I'm submitting it to my lawyer. You wouldn't dare destroy your own bloodline, Vera hissed. I looked her dead in the eyes. You destroyed it first. I'm just submitting the paperwork. No more words. I turned and walked out. Ellie ran after me and gave me a quick hug, one that nearly broke me. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, You did nothing wrong. Ever. Back in the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The rain began again, like it had just waited for me to finish what I came to do. Later that evening, I stood in front of the hallway mirror in my house. My press conference outfit hung on the door. A navy suit. Simple. Clean. No frills. Nothing to distract from the words I was ready to say. I touched the lapel, adjusted the sleeves, and took a breath. Let's make the legacy public. 2 days after dropping off that flash drive, I stood in front of the mirror in the dressing room at Fredericksburg Civic Hall, adjusting the lapel of my navy blazer for what felt like the 100th time. My fingers traced the silver pin I'd secured just beneath my collarbone. My grandfather's. I hadn't worn it in years, but today wasn't just about legacy. It was about clarity, and there was no piece of him more honest than that small, simple pin. Outside the curtain, I could hear the buzz of anticipation, folding chairs scraping tile, murmured conversations, the occasional click of a camera being tested. A woman in a headset peeked in and gave me a nod. "You're up in 30 seconds, Mrs. Greer." I gave a single nod in return. My palms weren't sweating. My voice was steady. For once, the fear that usually crept in at the last second didn't show up. I wasn't here to beg. I wasn't here to play the role they'd tried to cast me in all these years, the broken daughter, the hysterical little sister. I stepped onto the stage. The room wasn't massive, but it was packed. Reporters, bloggers, a few familiar community figures. My eyes briefly locked with Pastor Lane from our family's old church, seated in the second row. His face was unreadable. Cameras flashed as I walked to the podium. I took a slow breath. "My name is Opal Greer," I began. "For months, people have told my story for me, misquoted it, distorted it, shaped it into a cautionary tale about selfishness, ungratefulness, and betrayal. Today, I take it back." I tapped the tablet set beside the mic. The room fell silent as the speakers filled with the audio I'd heard so many times now. It was burned into my brain. My mother's voice rang out, clear, cold, and confident. "If she doesn't give it up, you know what to do, Isolde. You're the one they believe." Gasps rippled through the audience. Chairs creaked. Someone up front muttered, "Oh my God." Then Isolde's voice followed, calm and calculating. "She's always been dramatic. If she spirals, that's on her. The more fragile she looks, the easier it'll be to shift things legally. Let her drown in her own noise." Pastor Lane shook his head, slow and solemn. A journalist in the back mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but it wasn't kind. When the recording ended, I waited. Let the silence sit. "They didn't just lie about me," I said. "They tried to engineer my collapse, not through confrontation, but through a narrative. One designed to make me question my sanity, to break me, quietly." I clicked to the next slide. 2 documents appeared on the projection screen behind me. Both were letters. One, a handwritten note from my grandfather to me, dated a month before his death. The second, a typed message claiming to be a posthumous correction to the will, allegedly signed by him. The letter on the right, I explained, was circulated anonymously to legal media outlets last month. It claimed my grandfather wished to revoke my inheritance and redirect it to my sister, Isolde Venn. Gasps again, some murmuring. Phones were now up and recording. "The problem?" I continued. "It's fake. The signature was lifted from a public birthday card image posted years ago. The language, unlike anything he ever wrote. He never referred to me as Opaline. And this typo right here?" I pointed. "He never misspelled the word entrepreneur." Laughter broke out from one corner of the room. A woman in a red blouse chuckled, then quickly covered her mouth. I looked straight into the crowd. "They didn't just try to rob me. They tried to erase him, his wishes, his voice." At that moment, the side door creaked open. Isolde, late, disheveled. Clutching a black leather folder, probably full of whatever clarifications she had hoped to give before I nuked her credibility, she walked toward the other mic. People turned, phones lifted higher. But before she could reach it, I reached forward and flipped the switch on her microphone. Off. "You've had your platform," I said, eyes fixed on hers. "This one's mine." The room froze. Then, applause. It started small. One person, then another, then rows. A round of claps not for spectacle, but for someone who finally said no loud enough to matter. Isolde froze. Her mouth opened and closed once, like she was weighing whether to force the mic back on. She didn't. She turned and walked out without another word. When the noise settled, a young reporter raised his hand. I nodded. "What do you want from this, Mrs. Greer?" "Nothing," I said plainly. "Except for the truth to stop being optional." Another voice called out, "Are you filing criminal charges?" "My attorney will answer that," I replied, glancing toward Noelle, who stood in the back, arms crossed, a small smile on her lips. After the event, people trickled toward me. Some offered business cards, others just shook my hand. One older woman, probably in her 70s, touched my arm gently and said, "Took me 40 years to stand up to my sister. You're braver than most." It wasn't until I was back home that I saw the envelope waiting on my doorstep. Legal mail, hand-delivered, no return address. I opened it slowly. My hands didn't shake this time. Inside was a notification. My parents had filed for guardianship, again. The filing stated that I was mentally unfit to manage a large estate, citing emotional instability, grandiose public behavior, and erratic media appearances. I closed the envelope, and I smiled. "They want war?" I said quietly. "War gets paperwork." The following week passed in a blur of signatures, document verifications, and witness statements. Noelle and I worked in tandem like clockwork, me supplying timelines, her building strategy. We met at her office each morning, and by the time Friday came, we were ready. That morning, I arrived at the county courthouse 20 minutes early. The building rose pale and imposing against the crisp blue sky. A flag flapped at half-mast, commemorating a tragedy far removed from the one unfolding inside. I wore a simple black suit, hair pulled back tight, no jewelry save for the silver pin on my lapel. I wasn't dressing for pity, I was dressing for clarity. Now inside, security was tighter than usual. No cameras, no press, just benches, marble floors, and cold air. Vera, Calvin, and Isolde sat together across the aisle, though no one spoke. No one looked at me. Their silence had evolved from avoidance into calculation. Noelle walked beside me, a red folder tucked under her arm. "We're sticking to evidence," she said quietly. "Let them hang themselves." I gave a single nod and took my seat. The judge entered and sat down with a sigh like he'd already seen too much nonsense that day. He glanced at the petition. Guardianship hearing for Opal Greer, based on alleged psychological instability and risk to inherited estate. He looked up. "Mr. Greer, are you aware of this filing?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, meeting his gaze evenly. The judge turned to Calvin. "Mr. Ed Greer, you filed the petition?" Calvin stood. "Yes, my daughter has become erratic, paranoid. She's launched a public campaign accusing her family of conspiracy. She's not well." The judge blinked slowly. "And you have evidence of this instability?" Calvin paused. "Her behavior speaks for itself." Noelle rose without waiting. "Your Honor, if I may?" The judge waved her forward. "We have full psychiatric evaluations confirming Ms. Greer's mental stability, conducted prior to the press event. Additionally, we're submitting digital records, text messages, audio recordings, and a forged letter circulated anonymously by the petitioning parties, all designed to frame Ms. Greer as unstable to reclaim access to her inheritance." Noelle handed the red folder to the bailiff. The judge opened it, skimmed the contents, then leaned back in his chair. "This feels less like concern," he said finally, "and more like retaliation." A hush fell over the courtroom. "I'm denying this petition," he continued. "And furthermore, based on the documentation presented, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible investigation into perjury, fraud, and coordinated defamation." There was a sharp intake of breath behind me. Isolde stood up, her voice rising. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." I turned to her, my voice low but clear. "Save it. We're not sisters anymore." The courtroom clerk glanced up sharply, but the judge didn't flinch. We exited the courthouse in silence. The sun had warmed by then, but I still felt cold. The fallout came fast. By Monday, LifeCure's main investor had pulled out. A public statement followed, citing ethical concerns and misrepresentation of internal affairs. Lucan was served papers for prior financial misconduct tied to a previous venture he'd hidden from Isolde, and apparently from the IRS. Vera was removed from the board of her charity after a board member anonymously forwarded the press conference clip. Calvin's military retirement benefits weren't revoked, but his honorary committee chair status was quietly suspended pending further review. They didn't just lose their narrative, They lost their armor. Meanwhile, I started receiving letters, real ones, typed, handwritten, emailed, from women, from former caregivers, from daughters who had been made invisible. One stood out. It came from a woman in her 70s in Vermont. I believed I was crazy too, she wrote. Until I watched you speak. You reminded me I'm not. Thank you. Another came with a small check enclosed. No name, just, for your center. Build it where your truth can live. Even the local news station called. They wanted me to speak at their next Women in Power event. I declined, for now. I wasn't ready to be a symbol. I just wanted my house back. Later that week, I stood in the front hallway of the estate. My estate. The one I used to walk through as a child, careful not to touch anything, because that's not for you, Opal. The air still smelled of cedar and old books. Some parts of it still made me uneasy, but not the same way. In my hands was the signed property protection deed. No one could contest it now. Not legally, not morally. I walked into the study. The window overlooked the old oak tree in the backyard, the same one my grandfather used to sit under with his whiskey and a crossword. The leaves were changing, gold giving way to rust. I opened the window and let the breeze come in. Let's rebuild it, I whispered to myself. On truth this time. 3 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning, the gates to the estate opened to the public for the first time. The front lawn, once a symbol of intimidation and wealth, now welcomed neighbors, students, and travelers with quiet grace. The large oak tree, whose branches had weathered decades of family secrets and whispered judgment, stood tall and unwavering. The new sign out front had been crafted by a local carpenter and sealed by hand. It read, "The House That Dignity Built." That name hadn't come from me. It had come from a letter sent by a retired nurse who once cared for my grandfather. "He didn't give you that house to carry a burden," she wrote. He gave it to you because you carried yourself with dignity when the rest were running after image." The main hall had been completely transformed. The old chandeliers remained, but the walls now bore artwork donated by community members, local painters, school children, veterans, and single mothers who used their hands to speak when no one would listen. In the center was a quiet corner, curated from my grandfather's collection, his books, his sketches, a pair of gloves he wore when he used to work on the garden with me. Visitors filed in slowly. I stood near the entrance in a soft gray blouse and dark jeans, welcoming them not with a guide's enthusiasm, but with a listener's patience. A teacher with a clipboard approached. "Is this your family home?" I nodded. It was. Now it belongs to the story. She smiled gently and led a group of students toward the west corridor, where letters from survivors, handwritten in delicate penmanship, lined the walls. One little boy stopped in front of a display of brass doorknobs. "Why are these here?" "They came off the original bedroom doors," I said, crouching beside him. My grandfather restored them himself. He said every hand that touches a door deserves to feel something real. He nodded, too young to fully understand but wise enough to know it mattered. There were no sponsors, no donor plaques, nothing on the brochures even mentioned the word inheritance. That part of the story didn't belong here. What lived in these walls now was the truth that survived the fire. A reporter had asked me weeks earlier, "Where did you find the strength?" I'd answered simply, "I didn't. They gave it to me when they tried to break me." In the study, behind a small shelf I'd had built into the original desk, I'd found one last letter. It had slipped between drawers, likely hidden on purpose by my grandfather. It wasn't long, just one line. "You were always the one who saw things as they were." I folded the paper and placed it inside a sealed frame. I didn't hang it. I placed it upright against the window ledge, next to the chair where he used to sit and hum old gospel songs under his breath. Not every ghost needed to be banished. Some were just meant to sit beside us quietly until we knew how to live with them. Elsewhere in town, Vera lived alone now in a small condo unit on the edge of the retirement district. She'd been asked, gently but firmly, to step down from the charity board. The pastor no longer called. Friends stopped inviting her to luncheons. At first, I heard she tried to host dinners, but too many seats stayed empty. Her calendar hung still on the fridge, untouched since July. On her wall, just above the faux mantel, sat a single framed photo. It had once been our family portrait. Isolde's face looked polished, like always. My side of the photo had been turned to face the wall. I didn't visit. I didn't call. Forgiveness, for me, wasn't about reunion. It was about release. At the estate, people began sharing their own heirlooms. One woman brought in a prayer quilt passed down through 5 generations. A retired judge donated his grandfather's gavel, engraved with the words, "Justice must begin at home." A local veteran group asked to host monthly workshops on leadership because, as their coordinator said, dignity isn't born, it's built. I didn't speak at every event. Some days I just poured coffee. Other times, I walked the garden alone, collecting fallen leaves in a woven basket my grandmother once used for apples. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hill, I stood under the oak tree, its bark rough against my fingertips, its shade cooler than I remembered. I didn't think about the lawsuit anymore, or the betrayal, or the letter my mother had tried to forge. I thought about the boy with his hand on the doorknob, the teacher explaining the letters, the retired judge sitting quietly in the corner, eyes glassy with memory. I thought about the truth, how it outlives the lies, even when it's buried. I touched a branch and said softly, "I'm still healing, but this is mine, and I chose to share it." Sometimes, the deepest scars aren't from strangers, but from the people who were supposed to protect you. This story wasn't just about inheritance, it was about identity, truth, and what we choose to do when silence is no longer an option. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you believe more stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next one.